So, who am I? What do I do? That's a bit of a biography of myself. So, the area that I work in is the Mallee and the parts of the northern Wimmera. The area I cover is about 450 k's, and the Mallee is such a highly variable location. It's from dune swales down to vertisols in the Wimmera. And as Pete said, you know, ryegrass is number one in some of those areas, so central and southern Mallee into the Wimmera, but brome grass is number one in the northern Mallee. You don't see a lot of ryegrass in the northern Mallee because of those sandy type soils. So we've got a whole range of mixing and rotating that we need to do in certain areas. So the systems in terms of farming in those areas has started off probably no different to a lot of areas. It was highly intensive to cereals, so you're talking around 80% cereals and 20% break crop, and that was only 10 years ago. You'd see the Mallee now even into 280 to 90 millimetre rainfall zones, where the break crop percentage is at around 50%, and 30 to 40% of those break crops are now pulses, and there's a reason for that. I'm actually going to try and demonstrate the reasons for that. You have some canola. Canola's really taken a bit of a hit since 2014, since the green peach aphid, and just frost and just lack of control and predictability around canola. But it's coming back for a couple of reasons. Because of lentil prices, you can't get rid of them. That's one reason. But so there's been a major shift and system shift over the last few years, and it's given us a really good opportunity to mix and rotate. So why do we need to mix and rotate? This would be the reason, I'd reckon. Pete's just been talking. That's actually a paddock that I looked at this year. I suppose this is in response to that market change. So there's a great opportunity. We'll put a crop of canola in there. There's actually canola in there somewhere. Where's my pointer? There it is. TT canola, fairly reactive, no pre-em. We'll come in with the atrazine, the cletho, that sort of thing. So no mixing. So really, it's all about selection pressure. You've got numbers. You're going to have pressure. You're going to have an evolution to resistance fairly quickly in this situation. So I'm going to go back. This is from the Diversity Can't Wait website on the Bayer's website. It's actually a very good, informative website. Go back to when I first started, and a couple others out here would have started in the late 80s, early 90s. And if you look back up here, 253 patent applications back then. If you look in terms of herbicides, so there were the Tigrexes, the Eclipses, the Hograsses, the Macheves, etc. And you look down to here, we're back down to about 54 applications. I think the important point here is also there's probably a lot of post-ems here, and they're actually getting a bit of a kick up with some of these new early pre-ems, which is a really good opportunity for us going forward. Okay, so that just gives you a bit of history in terms of the old stuff still there, and for some of us. I pulled this photo out. It's an old photo. I actually had to take a screenshot of it because it was on a Polaroid. So it just shows you how that grey hair came about. But this is a farm near Swan Hill. Who's on Twitter? Put your hand up if you're on Twitter. Come on, Warwick. So this guy, Warwick knows him. His name is Lee Bryan. And if you're not following Lee, you should be following Lee. Peter does. They have some good chats. The Bryan family, so his father Dale I first started dealing with, they're very innovative people. They're thinkers, and Lee's a thinker. So this is what happened back in 1997. We'd found that they actually did sow medic pastures back there, and they're really ruining the day that they ever did that, particularly now they're growing lentils. But back then, medic pastures were sown for nitrogen fixation, and the opportunity around spraying grasses out, and brome grass predominantly being the number one. So it was year in, year out, so medic pasture, wheat, medic pasture. And what happened was we were overusing those FOPs, and we've got FOP-resistant brome here. So I sent it away, and Chris Preston said to me, well, you're lucky, Rick, that's the first one. Thanks, Chris. So that was my first feeling that I'd lost a little bit of control. So put up your hand on your farm, whether you're thinking now that you've lost a little bit of control, or you've got it all intact. Put up your hand if you've lost control. Yep, couple. Righto, we'll try and get it back today, I reckon. We'll do our best. So Lee's response to this, being an innovative sort of guy, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. This is his response, was a shielded sprayer. Now this is Mark III, this one here, self-guided shielded sprayer. Back then his concern was if we overuse the IMI chemistry and I lock myself into the Clearfield treadmill, then I've got some problems as well. So he was thinking, okay, why can't I use a shield on my wide rows and then take out low numbers in that phase after a pulse or something, okay? So that's how that came about. This is not uncommon in the central mallee, southern mallee into the Wimmera. So you've got Brodel on radish, 35% survival. This is a farm I look after. It's a lot of fun. Pete, you probably would have seen a lot of this stuff over in the west. But I tell you what, it's funny what these sort of tests and this sort of information does to people. Actually makes them probably better farmers, to be honest with you. This farm is really clean, and it's predominantly not about the fact that we lost all these, it's that we introduced a lot of cultural control since windrow burning, etc. Ray, you would vouch for that one? So that's the farm. They're hurricane lentils. That's the Brodel. Oh, well, that's the radish, 180 mils of Brodel. It's not a good look. Apparently, Gus, are you here? Gus McLennan, he's saying that in his tests locally in that, and some of the radish tests that he'd done, that diflufenic resistance was quite common in this area too, in lupins, etc. Glyphosate resistance, we just talked about it, Pete. There you go. Test last year, 3 litres, 20% survival. So this is coming off, you know, fence lines, etc., into the paddock. That's what you typically see, and there you typically see this sort of stuff going on now. So that's 2 litres of glyphosate. So that farm I just showed you, we do use the paraquat double knocks and group C's, etc., and group G's along the fence line. I'll continue on. So what is mix and rotate? Mix and rotate, if I go through that, I need to give you some background information first before I go to the next slide. There's a guy by the name of Pat Trenell. He's a researcher, and Pete can help me out here if I get lost, but he's a researcher from University of Illinois. And what they'd found was in their travels around the US in 2006, they'd seen that water hemp or amaranth was growing in some paddocks above the crop and then not in other paddocks. And they were looking at glyphosate resistance at that time. So going forward to 2010, they decided to extract information from a whole series of contractors from about 100 and something paddocks, was it? Yeah, 100 paddocks. And from those 100 paddocks, they used all the data they could possibly find. So the landscape, the soil type, etc., etc. From all that data, what they'd found was it was the difference between one field being resistant in 2010, right? And I'll just go forward to the graph here. I hate using this microphone. Let's go forward. Come on. So what the difference was, so one field being resistant to glyphosate and one not being resistant to glyphosate in 2010 was all to do with management. That's good, isn't it? And the management was that those were using 2.5 times more modes of action in the tank or per crop in that period between 2004 and 2006, so per year, were 83 times less likely to have developed resistance in that 2010 period. Whereas the 1.5, the guys are using 1.5 in the tank. So I mean, you can't do that 1.5 unless you were back in the 90s where we used to cut rates. But effectively what's happening here is the average rate was 1.5, and they were significantly higher, likely that they would be, that those fields were resistant. Is that right, Pete? Yep. Beautiful. I needed to explain that because this is the whole guts of the presentation. Well, let's go back to the rotating to buy more time. We know this sort of stuff, don't we? So yeah, there's all your herbicide groups. I'll pick one out, Group D, trifluralin. So this would be a rule of thumb. This is from Chris Preston. I talked to Chris and Peter Botsalis a fair bit, and they've helped me out with this presentation. Group D, trifluralin, if you use that every year for 10 years, you'd find you'd probably start to see resistance. So if you use that every second year, so give it a break every second year, it'd take you, see, 15 to 20 years. So that's that rotating to buy time, and then that mixing bit from the previous slide about mixing to buy more shots, okay? So then we've got this one here. This is my last graph, to be honest with you, because I don't like them as much as you do, but we've got to get the gutsy stuff out. This is in response to some of the work that Roberto Buzzi did in the lab. Now what he'd found in the lab was he could induce secure cross resistance to box of gold. Bit scary, isn't it? But he can do it, so it's obviously going to be done in the field at some point in time. So what they wanted to do is, okay, if we adopted some sort of management strategy, what would be the outcome? So they looked at no diversity, so using trifluralin up here, number 1, year in, year out, 10 years. Okay, so no mixing, no rotating. So you go to rotation 2, which is basically rotating between trifluralin, box of gold, Secura, propizamide being edge. And they've got that out to, well, that looks like about 13, 15 years, I suppose, and a little bit less resistant in the population. What if we mixed it, as we just found out from Trinell's work, mixed trifluralin with brosulfocarb, trifluralin with Secura, left propizamide out, saying that it had a bit of a lower gene frequency, they were assuming, what would happen? They were getting out to 22 years in their modelling. Quite exciting from the fact that if we've got those tools in the toolbox, we've got some opportunities there to manage resistance. So how do we do it? This is the way I approach it. Firstly, you've got to know your numbers. It's pretty scary stuff, and that's after a pulse phase. So knowing your numbers is really important. Record those numbers. I use the AgWorld program just in the notes section. So you can see all my notes. That'll be on the paddock, and those notes line up under each other, year in, year out. So I can just click on the note for that year and say, well, okay, my scores that year up here, I had a score for brome, had a score for rye, and medic, etc., and then I'll set a strategy going forward. We can always refer back to that strategy, which is really important. What's working, what's not. Actually do a lot of these because they give us confidence about what's in the toolbox to a certain degree. So resistance tests. Who's into this? Resistance, yep. Ray, yep. Very important tool to use. So once we've established our numbers, our direction, where can we fit these tolerant crops into the rotation? Because obviously tolerant crops to particular herbicides gives us an opportunity to mix and rotate, okay, where you wouldn't normally be able to do it. So these are hurricane lentils. I took that photo there a couple of weeks ago in the mallee. That was back on cord wheat, which had an IMI, trifluralin, this had a prosulfocarb, etc. So these are opportunities for us. A new line of tolerant crops coming through, which is the metribuzin tolerant lentils. They'll be about 5 years away. So that's about 160 grams of metribuzin. So it's a lot of metribuzin and not worrying that crop. This is off Twitter. Justin Kudnick said this variety will be out in 2019, which is a Clearfield, so it's a Clearfield TT, so Hyola CT. So it's pretty much like a 559 TT hybrid. So it's a really good opportunity to mix and rotate. And you've got Pioneers, OptiGly, Clearfield, Roundup Ready, likely 19, I think. John, is it? John? Yep, likely 19. Once you've set that rotation, crops, etc., I like to sit down with my clients and set some targets. Okay, targets around cultural control, how much topping are we doing? This guy's hit 37% crop topping, fantastic result. Okay, know your risks. Who's got a disc seeder? Okay, obviously know our risks when it comes to disc seeder. This is a disc seeder client of mine on some lighter soils. Actually, that's probably a heavier soil for him in the mallee. We're just putting out some lime squares just to have a look at the system, see where that trifluolin and Avadex or whatever it might be ends up. It's actually thrown the soil over it quite well. It's quite an aggressive system. What we'd found was, however, that some of that product was getting pulled back into the row with the closer wheel. So you've got to know your system, how it works in terms of some of these products. This is a bit of a risk for him going forward until we sort that out, which is probably unlikely. We've got 30 to 40% plant reduction here. This is a John Deere disc, for instance. That's the typical what you'd see if the disc went through a lime square. The trifluolin will still be sitting on the surface. So when it comes to other crops like lentils, this is jumbo lentils in a stripper front system in the mallee. That was about 3 weeks ago. And metribuzin up front seemed to work all right. We adjusted the rate depending on the soil type. We know it's fairly soluble, but it seems to be okay in that particular situation. Okay, what are our opportunities there? So once we know our system, what are our opportunities? So I thought this is from Peter Botsalis. Where's my, so if you can look down the left-hand column there, you can see the year of introduction. So trifluolin pre-2005, etc., all the way. And there's some of these new actives down here. Down the middle here, there's the trade name, chemical group, and then over here whether it's got a pulse registration or not, which is really important for those pulse growers, so mallee, Victorian, Wimmera guys. I'll just flick it over here, so there's quite a few actives there to play with. This is from Chris Preston, he sent me this. This is what you could do with some of the mixing and rotating of pre-Ms. So when you're talking about barleying and using J's and K's and a disc system, we'll actually have to come up with a bit of a solution around that a bit later. But with pulses for us, we've got a lot of opportunities, and there's a couple of new groups coming in under that, and I'll just show you. So this year we've got with our disc system, IBS, prosulfocarb. We've got butazine out now, which is a group K. End of this year we've got a new group, K and Q mix, which will be quite effective for being able to rotate away from propizamide to a certain degree. And this one here in 2019, which is called, from Adama, called Ultro. It's 1311. I've actually done a bit of work on that, and it'll be for pulses, and it's a group E. It's very soluble, so it'll only take 5 to 10 mils of rain, so might not suit those high rainfall areas, but it can be applied pre, it can be applied early post with a grass selective. It's good on brome and ryegrass, so it'll have a fit as well. And then this new one here, Chris said is looking very promising, 2020, which is from FMC, new group again, cereals, pulses, canola for ryegrass. So what are our mixing opportunities for this? Is it a risk? You look at this. This is a particular sample that was submitted there from the York Peninsula in 2014. And upon testing, they'd found that there was resistance to Avadex, and then there was cross resistance to Boxer Gold. So in response to some of the work that Roberto had done with cross resistance, and some of these samples that are coming in that are showing cross resistance to Avadex and Boxer Gold, rotating through the blue boxes, which you would likely do or these ones here in particular, in a disc system, is at a risk. We're going to have a bit of a chat about that a bit later. So what's an effective mix? How much time have I got left? 7? What's an effective mix? That's not effective. The population is resistant to trifluorine, so the propyzamide in that is doing all the work. So it's not what we would classify as an effective mix. Still works well. Is that an effective mix? Factor plus clethodim? Greg? Yep, very big pun? Sometimes, yes, exactly. So that's an opportunity for us, particularly if you're in a zone like in my central mallee where clethodim resistance isn't that high, so it might be 10 or 15% at 350 mils. So using 500 mils plus 100 gram of factor, this is the opportunity for us to control that resistant clethodim population at those lower levels for allowing the factor to do some of the work. So it's probably more of an additive effect between the two of them on certainly some populations within that, or some mutations within that population. What we like about it is the fact that we can use the factor to control that clethodim population or mutation in a pulse crop. So we use it in pulse crops, not canola. It's too risky for us. And then we'll come back and give it another hit in the pulse. So 2 or 3 hits and then a crop top. So there's your difference between your factor, clethodim, and then the mix in terms of on clethodim resistant ryegrass. Not effective. Anyone seen this in their canola crops this year, that stuff? So this one here's the story behind that. Last year's wheat, trifluorine only, no mixing. Trifluorine susceptible population still, but no phases, so a lot of numbers. Coming here with canola based on a market risk strategy, so looking for a cash crop. Coming early with a clethodim in the frosty period, didn't work all that well, as we know, with clethodim and frost. So that's not an effective mix. Is this an effective mix? So this is what we call in the mallee now and the Wimmera, we call it a double knock crop top desiccation. Greg, you used a bit of that? Now, it's a very good tool for us because if we're sowing dry, we don't get the opportunity to apply double knocks in front of crops like pulses, particularly lentils. So we, at the end, like to use our glyphosate paraquat as a double knock. So this one here would have had glyphosate and sharpen and then paraquat 1 to 2 days later. So we're able to pick up that seed set at the end using 2 modes of action, plus the sharpens in there to help on weeds like south thistle, which is a real problem in zero no-till systems. So there's another mode of action on that, and also you'll find there'll be some fleabane and whatever in there, so it's an opportunity to double knock fleabane. So it's an excellent mix. So mixing components must be effective on the target, so they must be effective on those mutations, like the factor and the clethodim. They must be at lethal doses. They must be compatible, physically and chemically, not antagonistic. So glyphosate with 2,4-D is a classic, but if you double knock that, it wouldn't be such a bad mix. Okay, synergistic, group H's and group C's in the tank, in the drum, so velocity, talanols are synergistic mixes. But something like a precept, then you add metribuzin with AMS, of course, not oil, is a synergistic mix. So on bigger radish, for instance. Then you've got your enhancements, so your AMSs with atrazine and clethodim and all those sort of things. They're really important. And look, importantly, when you're mixing, crop safety is a key component of all this. I'm just going to quickly run through, much time left. I'm going to give you an example of a mixing strategy with diversity in as the key component of this. So this is a farm at Berrawillick, wheat 2015. It had Avidex trifluorine. There's a reasonable amount of ryegrass through this patch here where I did my trial. I'm lucky I found it. Windrow burnt for the fumitory and ryegrass. There's the untreated section, 128 plants per square metre, so 1.2 million plants per hectare. There's a treated, so the trifluorine worked in all the treatments. So this one was trifluorine and turbine, so 87% control, so very effective. Then it was grass sprayed twice, factor, clethodim, haloxyphop and then come back with the double knock crop top. 3 tonne to the hectare, so there's a lot of mixing and rotating going on, only because we've got a phase going really well. This is it, as we're down, they're quite small, so it's just easier to control. So even in that frosty period, we've got some really good results. That's the paddock there, you can see it's quite clean. It'll be crop top. You see that Chris Prester's work here. You know, you're still getting it at the end there, even though there might be the odd plant, we're still getting on those. Whatever's left, we're still going to get around 70 to 80% control. And also we like to mix and rotate. So same farm, different system. This is oat and hay, Mulgara oats, cross sown. So his seeding system is 15 inch, cross sown at 15 degrees. We'll use this sort of crop back on the lentils with no pre-em. Okay, we've driven numbers down hard. Actually, very competitive crop. If you look along the fence line, you can see this ryegrass here. Peter, you talk about fitness penalty. This fella here, when we're talking glyphosate resistance, this fella here, he looks like he's just about dead. That's a ryegrass plant in that crop. Obviously, he'll get cut. Hopefully, we'll pick up some of that when it gets cut. If not, we'll double knock it. So that's a really good way of rotating, mixing groups, and then to rotate out of herbicides with crops like that. So in summary, monitor, test, measure, really important if you want to mix and rotate well. Plan and prioritise, because you won't be able to do it over the whole farm. It'll cost you too much money. Know your risk and opportunity, so your disc systems, etc. 2 or more groups. Use the most effective products, so they've got to be compatible. Lethal rates for the target weed. Okay, do it early and do it often. And at the end of the day, what are we trying to achieve? Predictability, isn't it? It's nothing better to driving in crops like this. Is a mallee crop this year, right? That's 300 mil rainfall zone, back on a pulse. So there's a lot of predictability there, because our cereal crop next year will be clean and less costly. This guy here, Potsy, he's a good client of mine at Rainbow. He's pretty happy with what we're doing. He's got a bit of control because he's a busy man like most of you farmers. And control is what it's all about, isn't it? That's why I asked you whether you got control, is that if you've got control, you're probably fairly profitable because you've got a clear head to think. Thanks from the Mallee.